It's the Let's Talk Polyamory podcast, where we talk about all things consensual non-monogamy, polyamory, swinging, and all things about how you can have a secure and sexy relationship. Now here's your hosts, Tara and André. It's the Let's Talk. Hey, André.
Hey, Tara. How you doing?
Okay, let's start again. Hey, André.
Hey, Tara. How are you?
I'm doing great. How are you this fine day?
I'm doing great. So it's been about 35 years that we've been doing this, and every time it's a surprise. Some surprises come up, and then it's also a surprise to me that it works. And I want to thank our producer Carolyn Franco for all the behind the work.
This is what happens when you produce your own podcast using the tools at hand. So if anyone's out there listening to us and you want to produce our podcast, let us know. But for now, we just want to get this awesome information out to you, and we felt that it's best to just get it out there and do our best.
Yeah, so we're flying.
What's that?
We're flying. We're up and we're doing it.
We're doing it. So hi again, André.
Hello, Tara. Hello, everyone.
It's another episode of the Let's Talk Polyamory podcast. For those of you who don't know us, we are your hosts, T&A. I'm Carolyn Franco. I am a relationship and awesomeness coach, and I specialize in supporting people, individuals and couples navigate non-monogamy.
You sure do. And I'm André Turcotte. I am a sex-positive psychotherapist.
Awesome.
Yeah.
And so we are the co-founders of this podcast and our online community of the same name, Let's Talk Polyamory. And our passion is really to help couples navigate the awesome world of open and polyamorous relationships. Because we've had quite a journey ourselves, and we want to share what we've learned both through our experiences and through working with other couples and stuff and helping them navigate their bumps and joys on the road.
Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned our being the co-founders and what this is all about, because I was speaking to somebody the other day and they said, I see you have a dating site. And I was like, no, it's not actually a dating site. It is a platform where we can have dialogue, a forum where we can talk about these things, and hopefully it'd be a resource, and we'll offer other resources. And it made me quite excited to think back that, it was meant and is meant as an open platform for people to talk about things, and it not just be about hooking up. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but this is a good thing. And it's wonderful because we do try to go beyond just what we know and invite others to share as well. And I think we're going to be talking about that a little bit later. One of the resources that we are looking into, that we also do, is a workbook on polyamory. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. But it's wonderful to think that we are facilitating this resource, this platform for people to have dialogue, to talk about these things.
Yeah, it's awesome. I think, it's an online Facebook community, a private group. And I think honestly, I haven't seen anything really like that. There are a lot of groups that there's discussion and that sort of thing, and dating and that sort of thing, but it's very unique in that way, in that we provide these resources. So yeah. I'm really proud of what we did and what we've put together, because through this podcast and our trainings and the group and the services we provide, we're able to support people. And because, I know when we started this, we really didn't know much. And I think that's a common thing, right? And it's nice to have resources out there to support you. So,
yeah. Where were we when we first started out, right? It could have helped us sidestep a few things.
Absolutely. So that's why today.
Making mistakes is part of the growing process, right? Everybody admits to the value of making mistakes, but we don't necessarily want to have to make them if we don't have to.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think in life, if you try something new, you're bound to make some mistakes and, step in it, as they say. while you figure out what not to do. So, and we
Mhm.
actually did a whole podcast episode on the mistakes we made when we first opened up, which is similar but different to this. But I, hmm?
I'm sorry to interrupt, but yeah, to talk about the mistakes we made sounds as though we're free of making any mistakes. I
Oh,
wonder what mistakes we're making currently and what mistakes we're going to make in the future. But
well, I think,
to our credit, though, one good thing we have about the mistakes we've made in the past, what we're making now, and what we'll make in the future, is that we also have the ability to look introspectively, to look at what was going on, and then to have open dialogues about it, to have communication about it, right? To find out what's at play and what was causing this, and what can we do in the future to have a different outcome.
yeah, absolutely. I
Mhm.
think, what's great, and, it's like with anything that you learn, it's like building up your toolbox. And I know we had a couple that we worked with through our open relationship and polyamory mastery program. And that's what they said was amazing about it, was that they had this little toolbox that they carry with them all the time of things and what they can go back to when they encounter things. Because new situations arise all the time. I'm finding myself currently in a situation that's new, relatively new, and I'm having to figure out how to navigate it. But knowing, having these other tools in my toolbox has really helped with that. So,
Yeah, and I'll add to that. Not only are they resources that we have in our toolbox, but some of the things, when we really go to them with an open heart and invite them, we can integrate them so they're not just only in the toolbox, but they become part of our way of being, like communication attunement, for example, or nonviolent communication. We learn to integrate these in our approaches to communicating, and not only just to our partners in polyamory, but in all facets of our life, right? That it can serve us in many areas. So it's a win-win in many ways.
I think one of the big things for me that I've learned throughout the 7 years that we've been doing this is really my sense of self, and sort of having really understanding myself, and having that introspection when things come up that I'm unsure about, and having the ability to kind of think through them, like, oh, how do I really feel about this?
Mhm.
Why might I be feeling this way? What's triggering this feeling and all that? And it sounds like, oh man, that's like not so exciting. People when they first open up a relationship just want to like jump in and like, have all the fun in the world. But I mean, part of the big thing for me was like personal growth, like huge personal growth. And it, like you said, it continues. We're not free of making mistakes or stepping in it. So today, which is why we thought we would talk about the sort of the essential do's and don'ts of polyamory and consensual
Mhm.
non-monogamy. We're using polyamory as a blanket term today. So things like parking your ego at the door and taking responsibility for your actions and your feelings, to comparing yourself to to not comparing yourself to
Ah.
others.
That's a very good Freudian slip there, a little paraplexus there.
Paraplexis.
Well, do we
Who
still do that,
doesn't like a
right?
paraplexis?
Do we compare and despair, right? Do we
Compare and
compare
despair.
others? Yeah.
So not comparing yourself to others,
Resisting
or
it.
using polyamory as an excuse to do
Mm.
anything that you want. That's a big
Ah,
one.
interesting. Mhm.
So, Andre, this was actually inspired by something that came up from a session you had with a client recently, didn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Somebody I'm working with is opening up their relationship, and they are transitioning from being monogamous in a close relationship to becoming consensually non-monogamous, and they are finding it to be quite inviting for the most part, but there are still a couple of sticking points. And we've spoken about some of the different aspects of it, and they also are writing and reading in uh, the polyamory workbook, and some of the things that they mentioned came up in our sessions. And well, I thought maybe it'd be interesting if we would take a look at that and talk about that as well.
Yes,
So
that's an interesting point, Andre, because I think as you do, you seek out resources, and you should when you're starting something new. And so the book that your client is reading, I think, right now, working through, is this
yes.
polyamory workbook. So it's an interactive guide to setting boundaries, communicating your needs, and building secure, healthy, open relationships. And it's by Sarah Youngblood Gregory. And so in it, there's this graphic that's on the left side of the screen, which has this sort of list of do's and don'ts. So it's actually lots of graphics and exercises in that book. And, it's interesting to see things like this because a lot of it is like things that we do in our program and walk things through. But like any book or resource, it's like a book is information, right? It doesn't really, while you can learn a ton from books, and I would totally encourage people to read all the books, and because there's different opinions, different things. Part of the reason people come to you and me and work on our program is because sometimes it's hard to implement and apply them to your personal situation.
Yeah, and to that point, and that's absolutely true. Not everything that's going to be in the book or books that you read is going to apply to you, and there may be some things that are never mentioned there. But as you mentioned, reading those books, reading all the resource is wonderful, but it really speaks to us on an intellectual basis and doesn't necessarily speak to us on an emotional way. So we may have understanding of it, but insight in itself is insufficient for change. We need to have that authentic emotional experience. And by talking about these things with somebody, we can come to find out what's our emotional investment in it and how do we feel about these things. And it helps us to create a greater dialogue than simply just reading about it. Because when it is simply read, it enlightens us, but it can be rather theoretical, philosophical at times. Whereas when we participate in it by actively talking about it and exploring our own thoughts and feelings, well, it can add much greater value to it. So the two combined are wonderful.
We're going to give a little shout out to one more book that I like, which is Polysecure by Jessica Fern. And we refer to that a lot in our podcast because she has some really great things about attachment and attachment styles and different styles of non-monogamy. And but again, amazing book. And I think she's actually put out a workbook now too. But, I found myself having to read through it and go, okay, like, how do I apply this to me? So, yeah. So, but it was an amazing book, the first of its kind, I think, to talk specifically about attachment in the context of polyamory. So if people haven't read it, it's a really great one to get.
Yeah.
So let's jump in. So today we're going through the do's and don'ts of polyamory, and we're inspired by this list from the Polyamory Workbook. And so we're just going to kind of go through them and talk about them. And I think we're going to also share, like our thoughts on some of them and also what might be missing in some of them.
Right. So just to say, it's a wonderful book and thank you for putting it out there. But without sounding too harsh or critical, there are a couple of things that I would say about it that seem not quite to resonate with me fully or might seem a little bit redundant. And it's a very long list, so I can appreciate their effort to be really thorough. But again, some of it might seem redundant or not applicable. Well, let's go through it and find out which ones might be and might not be. And where we are, I don't know that we're going to be able to really go through all of them, because as I said, it is quite a lengthy list. But let's give it a try. Let's see what we come up with.
Yeah, let's do our best. Okay, so let's start with. I think we should start with the do's. Go do through all the do's.
Oh, you want to go through all the do's first?
The do, of course.
And then, all right, so that sounds rather positive. And then all the don'ts. Okay, well, let's give it a shot. Sure, we'll go that way then.
Well, because I think I like to focus on the positives. Let's start with the first do. So check your.
I thought that if we did the do's and don'ts side by side, it would kind of make it more level rather than being totally optimistic and totally pessimistic. But maybe that's my side. Anyway, let's get to it. Do check your ego.
Yeah, says, right? So we talked a bit about this yesterday, and I liked how you explained this. So can you talk just quickly about this? Because I think I wasn't quite sure when I saw that. What does it mean to check your ego, to check your ego?
Yeah, what the hell does that have to do with polyamory? Do check my ego? Well, for me, what it really means is, do I have an investment in my own, wait, there's a fuzz floating around. Did you see it? That was cool. It's the angel hair. So what it means for me is I need to be aware of my ego's desires and frustrations. So when my ego wants what it wants and gets what it wants, everything's fine. But when my ego wants something and doesn't get what it wants, well, then what happens? Do I feel frustrated? Do I feel turned off? Do I feel rejected? All these things. So for me, coming into polyamory and the awareness of my ego might wanting its own thing and my ability to tolerate or not tolerate getting frustrated, how is that going to affect my idea of polyamory? Well, because my fantasies might be that I'm going to have all these different types of relationships and things are going to work out swimmingly and people are going to fall in line with my desires, but it might not work that way. In fact, given that there are so many other variables, there will be many times, if not most times, when my ego is not completely satisfied with all of its fantasies. So will I be able to tolerate that? And if I frame that as the introduction to polyamory, well, then it might say to me, listen, you can want what you want. You can have your fantasies, but you have to also consider that it might not go that way, that other people might have their own positions, their own thoughts, their own reservations, their own fantasies. So can you already come into it with an open heart, knowing that you probably won't always get what you want? And can you find that still inviting enough? Can you tolerate those frustrations and see the benefits to it? Whew.
That was awesome. I love it. Well, I think that's a big thing that people are often like, they have this big idea when they decide to be polyamorous, they're open or swing and that sort of thing. And, find that it's not quite so simple or easy, or the ability to match their desires, and doesn't always come true. So,
Mhm.
yeah. All right. Do interrogate double standards.
Mhm. Uh, Well, let's jump to the third one also that says, do interrogate the
Yes.
way sexism, racism, white supremacy, ableism, sex negativity, and homophobia may show up in your relationships. I'm all for deconstructing these. I'm all for the dialogue. However, I do take exception in the verbiage used. When it says do interrogate, to me, it speaks to our position of nonviolent communication. And an
Mhm.
interrogation to me sounds like we're going to tie the person down
Mhm.
and we're just going to throw our position at them. How about let's explore, or let's have dialogue?
Yeah.
So it might sound like semantics, but I think it's in the way that we frame it. The verbiage used is so critically important, right? Of all the possible words that we use, what makes us choose this one? So for me, that sent up a small red flag, but I want to invite dialogue as opposed to an interrogating process. But yes, by all means, let's definitely look at these issues like white supremacy, like racism, all these things, and let's have dialogue about it.
Yeah. So explore, identify,
Mhm.
be aware of how these things might be impacting you and how you're moving through polyamory. Absolutely. So
Mhm.
I like the next one. Do take responsibility for your actions.
Uh, that makes me think very much of, well, I didn't mean to hurt him, right? It wasn't my intention. But
Ah,
as we know, it's not the end of the sentence there. It's not just a question of our intention, but it's also the impact. So,
yes.
what did I do, if anything, that created this scenario? What was my role in it? What part do I have to play it? So we want to say, well, we take the action, we turn over the results. Maybe we don't really have to pay as much attention to how it landed for them. They will hopefully tell us, we'll invite them to let us know. But what was my part in it? What were the actions that I took that precipitated this outcome?
Awesome.
Mhm.
Amazing. Okay. Do learn the difference between healthy and unhealthy expectations.
Mm.
So I
What's
think
that
we
mean?
talked a bit about expectations at the beginning. I think healthy expectations sometimes may look like little or no expectations,
Mm.
and being open to possibilities, but not holding firm that this is going to be this is going to happen for sure. It's just like you meet somebody, I think this is a common myth, is like, oh yeah, all people who are polyamorous are love sex, and that you might have this expectation when you meet someone for the first time or even the second time that they're more likely to have sex sooner, or that yeah, that it's gonna, yeah, or you're at a party. I think we talked about in our Sex Parties 101 podcast that, you're gonna have sex with everybody there or something like that, right? And it just might not happen. So yeah. What were you gonna say?
Well,
Lee's looking at
it's interesting. Yeah, the expectation that we might have sex with people, and yet I am currently in a asexual romantic relationship with somebody, and I've uh, in my journey come across other people who are rather asexual or gray sexual or not necessarily being so sexual, and yet my experience in monogamy was there was more of an expectation that after a certain amount of time we would become sexual. So isn't that quite interesting, right? It does kind of fly in the face of what we might have had as a misconception about it. But really, for me, the unhealthy expectation is managing my expectations and my expectations of what others might do or not do. So we want to show up with an open heart to it. And it's often said we kind of might say, well, no pressure, no expectations upon meeting, and we will simply find out what the other person is wanting and willing and what we're wanting and willing, and take it from there.
Yeah.
But also that kind of goes back to, I'm sorry?
Communication.
Communication. But that kind of goes back to the earlier part of minding our ego, right? So our ego has fantasies and expectations. And if we can recognize those, it'll make it easier for us and for our potential partners.
Yeah, absolutely. And then I think the next one goes with it. Do let go of unhealthy expectations. Seems obvious
Mhm.
from the other one. So do learn how to apologize well. This one's
Mhm.
interesting. Do
Yeah,
learn to apologize well. I
well,
mean,
it's, yeah.
I think it goes with the one like taking responsibility for your action,
Mhm.
and taking responsibility could look like apologizing to someone that you may have done harm to.
Right. Yeah, and it's so interesting, right? Because what's it like to get a hollow apology, right? Like something
Mhm.
happens and the person's like, "Oh yeah, I'm sorry," and it's like they've moved on from it. It doesn't really seem as though there's much sincerity to it. But also, what are they apologizing for? Are they apologizing because you're upset, or are they apologizing because they recognize that maybe something they did was off-putting?
Mhm.
Right? So there's a difference there. Am I simply wanting to uh, relieve the awkwardness of your feelings that are just uncomfortable for me, and wanting
Mhm.
to kind of blanket over it with a quick "I'm sorry"? Or do I actually recognize how I had a part in this and what that might be, and how might I go forward in the future to prevent this recurrence? And
Yeah,
I
I
think
think
that
that's
makes a difference. Mm.
I think that's the true nature of it, right? Like when you're apologizing for something, it's recognizing the impact you had on somebody, whether intentional or unintentional, and then doing it well means like learning from that and not doing the same, or talking about how you want things to be different so you don't get into that situation again. It could look like a lot of different things. So yeah,
Yeah.
apologize well.
Mm.
Do approach your metamors with curiosity and warmth.
Mhm. Well, I
Ooh,
think we should approach everybody with curiosity and warmth. But that being said, not everybody is interested in kitchen table polyamory. Some people,
absolutely.
I met somebody last weekend, they are in a don't ask, don't tell. So their partner knows of their situation, but doesn't want to know any of the details, has no interest in meeting their metamors, none of that. So,
Mhm.
again, we have to take the temperature and find out what the people are wanting. But yes, of course, always meet everyone, hopefully with warmth and curiosity.
Yeah, I think some of this list is maybe impacted by relationships that the author has had. As we would all, when we write things or we make advice, it is based on our own personal experience.
Mhm.
But you're right. Like some people don't want to learn have their metamor as part of their life in any way, or even know them. And that's fine. And I think that's one of the myths of polyamory too, that people hold up this ideal that kitchen table polyamory where everybody gets along and blah, blah, blah is the thing to strive for. Just like compersion is the thing to strive for.
Right.
And I don't think those things are necessarily have to haves. You can be successful in consensual non monogamy and not want to have a relationship with your metamors. It's totally fine. Totally
True.
fine. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. Here's one of our favorites. Do
Now,
get tested. Huh?
yeah, okay. I think this one should have been number one,
Yes.
and this applies to everyone, and not just people in polyamory. In fact, unfortunately, many people who are in so-called monogamous relationships, if they go outside of their relationship, which we don't advocate for, that's nothing ethically open about that. But if they do step out, they find it rather difficult to tell their family doctor that they might need an STI test, or they have, depending on where they are, they might have limited access to getting anonymous STI testing.
Hmm.
But it is a responsibility not only to yourself, but to your partner and partners. It is critically important as a community in polyamory and outside of polyamory, that we take care of each other. And there should be no moral attachment. If you caught a flu, for example, we would not attach a moral thing because you had come in
Hmm.
contact with somebody and picked up their flu. Well, why should it be any different with STIs, right? The act itself of being physical with somebody is in itself not immoral. It's whether or not you do it openly and honestly. That's for me where the morality comes. So I think that this regular STI testing and conversations about it should be first and foremost.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, my experience, like, I mean, when I was monogamous and was in monogamous relationships, I didn't get STI tested like ever. Like, so, and now I'm like a regular, and it
Mhm.
doesn't matter whether I'm having sex or not having sex. It's still something that's part of what I regularly do. And our doctor, which we have the same doctor most of the time, she knows this. And so when we go in, like you said, like with a cut on our finger, she's like, oh, do you want to get tested? Like it always happens. And
Yeah.
it's amazing. That's why I love getting it done by my family doctor. I know people don't always feel comfortable with that, but I mean, and there's lots of places that you can get it done anonymously. So,
Mhm.
yeah.
But
Okay.
I think it's wonderful that we do have that relationship with our doctor, and we can say it in such a matter of fact kind of way that it kind of normalizes it, right? It takes it from this kind of taboo thing that is kind of looked at in some kind of I don't know, very base way that like, oh my god, like they're sexually active, like they're kind of skeevy people, and not at all. That we are responsible, loving people, and want to take responsibility for this. So I think it's wonderful. It's great getting back the test results that say negative, but it's also wonderful knowing that we are going forward and announcing this in a very matter of fact kind of way, and it's helping keep our community clean and safe. Well, I shouldn't say clean. Keep our community safe, rather. Pardon me.
Yes. Yeah, and things happen, and then it's all about communicating to people that you've been with, and we've been in situations where someone that we had been with contracted something and let us know, and that was cool, and then everyone just gets tested, and it's all good. You know what I
Yeah,
mean? It's like no
but isn't
judgment,
that
man, no judgment.
no judgment? But isn't it wonderful that they were able to announce their result, and then we as a community contacted people we had been in contact with and let
Mhm.
them know, and kind of everybody went into this kind of lockdown shutdown, got tested, found out the results, and then we were able to go back to the way we were. But it shows responsibility, but also shows our the strong bonds that we have in our community.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Okay, let's move on from that one. So, do get comfortable talking about sex and get educated. I think that's
Mhm.
pretty self-explanatory. It's good to, know about things and educate yourself. And that's from, things that could happen during sex, but also like, other things.
Yeah, absolutely. That makes me think back to some of the dialogues we've had, like even at parties or orgies or clubs. You might be tempted to go from one person to another, and
Mm,
while that might be, part of your fantasy and might be wonderful, there are certain things that you could bring back and forth. And even if there aren't STIs, there could be bacteria. So on your fingers, for example. So we advocate for the idea of washing our hands in between partners, right? Doing,
rinsing your
rinsing our
mouth.
mouth, right? All those things, and that will help to prevent spreads of, bacteria biogenosis or, urinary tract infections, things of that nature. But
Mhm.
really, we were able to address that because we do have open dialogues about sex, right? It helps to, again, destigmatize and normalize the idea that we can have these dialogues.
Absolutely. Okay.
Mhm.
Do get comfortable acknowledging and identifying areas in yourself where personal growth is needed. And I think we talked about this at the beginning. I definitely, there was some areas in my life that I needed to work on. And I mean, I think the big skill that I've improved since we began together is the communication part.
Mhm.
Like that was a big piece of it. And also the part around, owning your own decisions and actions and feelings. That was a big area of growth. And I think that's a big area of growth for lots of people that
Mhm.
they might need to work on and that we might not be aware of is impacting our relationships.
Yeah, absolutely.
The next one is do get used to asking people for support.
Mm.
So that's a good
Well,
one. So people could be your partners, but people could also be professionals in helping you work through some of these
mhm.
things because personal growth is great, but you can't always do it on your own in a vacuum.
Right. Yeah, and it's unfortunate because many people still find it very difficult to ask for support, myself included on occasion, right? So I think maybe it comes with the discomfort of appearing in any way vulnerable, but that we
Mhm.
might go beyond that because isn't it wonderful when we do give other people support and they might actually like supporting us as well, and we get the benefit of having that support. So we're not alone in this, right? We do uh, often need or can offer support to others.
I was listening to the CBC this morning, and the one person was talking about how we'll easily ask for help for our physical health, like we'll hire a coach or a trainer and that sort to work on our physical body, but
Mhm.
not necessarily our mental health, which is equally, if not more important, to our overall wellness. So, yeah. So the next one is related to that, which is do get used to asking how can I support you right now?
Right.
And so that's a great question that you might ask a partner if they're struggling with things, and they may not want support at that moment, but
Mhm.
it's a nice thing to be able to, well, I mean, I think you have to deal people always say you have to deal with your own shit, but you can also ask for help and you can also offer help.
Mhm.
I think that's what being a good partner is all about, is supporting our partners.
Right. And to that point, offering the help, they may, as you said, not even, they may not necessarily be able to ask for or receive that help, or they might not even know at the moment what it is they're wanting that would be most helpful. So again, we turn over our expectations that they're going to say, well, this is exactly what I need. They might not know either. And then maybe we accept that, but then maybe we can ask them other questions to help inform them, or we can ask that question again a bit later,
Yeah,
inviting them to.
absolutely. The next one is do use boundaries to protect yourself, not punish others.
Yeah. Any thoughts come to mind in particular with that?
Well, sometimes people say, I mean, I think it goes back to the term boundaries, and that boundaries relate to yourself as a person and
Mhm.
protecting you as a human, yourself, your mind, your space, your time, etc., rather than rather than rules
Mm.
that a couple might have. And I think that sometimes I don't want to get into that whole topic, but we've talked about that before, the difference between rules, boundaries, and agreements. Um, but I think sometimes people could say a boundary, create a boundary, a personal boundary that will limit another person's actions. Like, because I'm trying to think of an example. Do you have an example that you can think of?
Unfortunately, no, not off the top of my head.
Mm.
But I was wondering more to the point where she suggests that we use boundaries to protect ourselves, but not punish others. And I'm wondering just what she meant by punishing others with our own boundaries. So I might say, well, I don't do this type of thing, but is it used with the intent of wanting to hurt them, or is it simply with the intent of wanting to protect myself? But I don't know how my boundaries would necessarily uh, create that punishing effect in others. So I'd be open to hear from you or from any of our listeners what their ideas or thoughts about this might be.
Absolutely. Well, I guess the boundary someone could say is that they have a one penis policy, for example.
Mhm.
And, so that it's not meant to punish, but I think it's more meant to limit things. And, but it might not be the reason behind having that is that's I would say that's more of a rule than a boundary, but
Mhm.
because that impacts other people. So, anyways. All right. So, do internalize that love is abundant. I do like that one.
Mhm. What do you like? What do you like so much about this one?
Well, it's subscribing to the idea that love is not limited and
Mhm.
that we do have the capacity to love multiple people. And I think that's a key principle behind polyamory is the idea is that we can love and we do love multiple people in different ways. We have multiple relationships and that, you know, love is not a pie. Like if I give you a slice of a pie, it means there's less pie left. So that's kind of the analogy I like to think about is that, it's and if it is a pie, it's like a magically reproducing pie that continues to continues to create pie.
Yeah. I think that's well said. I love that pie analogy. I just imagined that it was a pie so big that each one of us had a slice to it, And if I took my slice, it didn't mean that I was taking your slice, that there would be a slice for you as well. And if I didn't take my slice, it was still going to be there for me later on. It is the
Mm,
idea of abundance to it. But love, our libidinal drive, is a drive. It is an endless source. And it's just like saying, well, if I loved my mother, I wouldn't have the capacity to love my siblings or my father. But that's
mhm.
just not true. I could love my mother, my father, and all my siblings, and there'd be love for all of them. And the same thing be true of polyamory. So yes, it's not a scarcity. It's not a finite thing. Love emanates from within us, and there's enough for everyone. And love is there waiting for you as well. When you might feel as though it's not there, well, have you begin to already determine that it's not there and started to shut down? Do you stop looking for it, as opposed to believing in the abundance and still availing ourselves to it, allowing for connection in other capacities?
Right. And I think that's why polyamory works for many people and why monogamy doesn't always work for people, because it may limit
Hmm.
your ability to love and create relationships with others. I actually we were talking about this with a friend, new friend yesterday, this idea of monogamy and, how it
Well,
might stifle that.
isn't it right there in the marital contract saying that it forsaking all others?
Yeah, absolutely.
Mhm.
Yeah. Okay. So the next one's related, move away from scarcity mentality and towards abundance mentality. I mean, I guess that does relate to love, but it also relates to dating, because I think sometimes what happens to people is when they first start, they think that, oh my God, there's going to be all these people that are willing to date me, and then don't find that happens. And then you can get into this situation where you believe that it is scarce, like that the ability to meet others is scarce. And I think actually believing in abundance and that there's people out there helps you, whether you're monogamous or non monogamous.
Mhm. Well said.
The next is, do actively seek out tools, therapy, and education on ethical non-monogamy. And we talked about that. That's exactly what we do.
Mhm.
And that's what, listening to people, reading books, all that stuff is always helpful. But I think you always have to filter that, or with your own sense of your own values and what's important to you and that sort of thing. Like you said at the beginning, not everybody's the way people think about things or how they approach consensual non-monogamy is going to be the way that you want to do it.
Right.
So,
Right.
um, and do embrace change.
Well, that again goes back to the very first one, the idea of checking our ego, right? Because often it's said that what we don't like about change is that it affects our ego, because we have one idea how things should be. And then when things change, we're like, well, wait a second, that's not what I imagined. That's not how I saw it. That's not what I'm used to. And the change can be rather disruptive. But things are always in flux. Things are always changing. We are plastic. So when we can allow for that change and appreciate it, it makes it easier for us. In fact, to the point where we say in psychology that the measure of a strong ego is not that remains fixed, but that can lend itself to change, that is flexible. So
Hmm.
we see the psychic growth. We become psychically more mature when we are allowing our experience to have a greater capacity, that we allow for change and embrace it, and perhaps even invite it.
Yeah, I love that. And it's
Mhm.
actually really important, I think, especially when you're moving into consensual non-monogamy for the first time, is like you may start in one place that feels comfortable and that sort of thing, but there's a high likelihood that you're going to want to shift into something else, higher levels of openness. And so being open to change, and it's great. All right, so
I
let's
will, but
move. Mhm.
before we go to the don'ts, maybe we can ask our listeners if there are things that they would like to see added to this list. Are there any do's that you think haven't been covered that you would think would serve us or our community well?
Yeah, absolutely.
Mhm.
Okay, let's move on to the don't side. And I think we can move through these pretty quickly.
All right.
So, don't compete with your partners for love and attention.
Again, a question of abundance or scarcity, right? If you have to compete for it, are you believing that there's a finite amount to it, right? So what's driving this competition? Are you afraid that they're going to get more than you are, and then you feel you have to compete with them for more? And is it because you are afraid of missing out in that? When you really believe or subscribe to this abundance, the competition seems to be less important.
I will put an asterisk though on that though,
Good.
because sometimes what happens when people open a relationship that's, was monogamous before, because of things like new relationship energy and that sort of thing, sometimes people can put more attention into other partners at the expense of their existing partner. And
Mhm.
so it's something to be aware of. So
Good point.
there shouldn't be competition, but there should be a recognition that all the partners are important, and making sure if those relationships are important to you, that you're nurturing them with love and attention. So
Yeah. So
uh,
next one is, don't make your discomfort other people's responsibility.
hmm yeah,
Mhm.
it's your fault that I feel jealous or I feel upset or whatever it is. Yeah.
You make me feel this way, you make me feel that way. So then
And
the
you must
question is,
fix it.
what's that?
And you must fix it. Fix it,
Right.
Andre. Fix my feelings.
Well, you know what happens is, the unfortunate part of that is then I become dependent upon you to offer me that relief, as opposed to being able to identify what's going on and becoming self-empowered, that I can
Mhm.
either find a way to accept it and go forward, or do something to change it, which I would
Yeah.
like better.
Yeah.
So it's fantastic that we come to that self-actualization, that we're able to really see how we become owners of that and what we can do to affect the change that we're wanting.
Yeah. You can, it's working towards self-regulating, right? And
Mhm.
that's not to say you can't ask for support, because we just talked, I'm pointing to the list.
Sure.
We just talked about it in the do list. But I think acknowledging what your feelings are and what your discomfort is, and then you could share that with your partner and ask them if there's specific things you think that they can do to help support you. But that
Yeah.
doesn't mean you're transferring responsibility to that person. You're still responsible for your feelings.
Next on the
Okay.
list, yeah, next on the list is, don't compare yourself with other polyam people.
Ah.
So try and resist compare and despair. But what's to say we shouldn't look at Mary, John, or Steve and say, well, I like the way that they relate. I like how they're able to go through these things and interact with people with a minimal amount or no jealousy, or how they're able to have compersion for their partner. So in that way, maybe we can look at it, but we should never want to compare ourselves and come out with a harsh judgment, a self judgment that we're not enough, or we're not good enough, or we just mess up all the time. Let's not subscribe to these negative feelings. They only make us weaker. If we do
Mhm.
find exception with something, let's be able to identify what is at play and how could it be better, in which way. How could it be causing us less friction, or the others less friction?
Yeah, just because someone is also doing it one way doesn't mean that that's the only way and that you're doing it wrong. You can be inspired and learn from some
Mm,
people and subscribe to a certain way that, as a goal, like people who are more open about
right.
their being polyamorous, for example. You may want to be that but aren't there yet.
Mhm.
That's a little bit different than comparing yourself. So,
Sure. So we
and
can
then
aspire to the positive.
yeah, absolutely,
Yeah,
but doesn't mean that that is the only way. You know what I mean?
sure.
Yeah. So, on the theme of comparing, the next one is, don't compare yourself with your partner's partner.
Sounds
I'm
like good.
laughing because I think this is a common thing that happens, and
Mhm.
has definitely happened to me, as you know. You had one partner in particular that I would compare myself with to myself,
Mhm.
and say like, "Oh, they're this, they're that, and I'm this, and I'm not those things," right? And I mean, some of that is when that happens, it's like, okay, asking yourself the question, is this really true?
Good question.
Am I like my thing? Oh, I'm not cool and they're cool. Well, I'm cool. I'm just cool in a different way. But also, we can be different. Like, and just because that person is a certain way doesn't mean that I'm not enough the way I am. I'm just different. And in fact, that's part of the beauty of, I think, being polyamorous and having the ability to have other relationships, is we can meet people who are different and enjoy that about them. It doesn't take away from you.
Right. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
great. It's wonderful. But I like how you are able to recognize that. And we say, well, are these facts or is it just feeling? Right. So is this person actually cooler than I am? Or do I just feel that they are? And then what's at play there? What's going on that would create this feeling? And we might be able to recognize that in that pause and say, well, you know what? There's no real hard evidence that this person is so much cooler. Let me just look at the feelings and where they might be coming from and how I might go beyond that. The next one is don't be hostile to your metamors. And that again, kind of, I want to talk about my motive. So, what might be making me in any way hostile towards my metamors, right?
Mhm.
And just for listeners who might not know, a metamor is my partner's partner.
Yes.
Right. So, what might create any feelings of hostility? Well, maybe I'm feeling a little bit insecure. Are they going to
Mhm.
love this other person more than they love me? Will there be coming back for me? Will there be enough love going around? So, what's causing that is the feelings of insecurity, right?
Mhm.
So, again, I look at my feelings and then I try to look beyond that, what might be causing them, and then how might I uh, re-support my position? How can I find ways to know that I am perfect just the way I am, that I'm a wonderful, loving, acceptable person?
Yeah. And the next one is sort of related to that. And I wanted to say something about this. It's like, don't sabotage your partner's relationship.
Mm,
So, sometimes people don't like their metamor and it might, try to make things difficult for their partner by saying bad things about them or saying they're not good for you. Like there may be real reasons why you have concerns about a particular metamor. But you have to do that, inside look first. It's not coming from a place of insecurity or something like that. But if you have true concerns that your partner's partner, might be have ill intent or whatever it is, there are ways of sharing that with your partner without just trying to sabotage it or being hostile towards them.
yeah, absolutely. So, again, we want to hopefully be able to have a good enough relationship with our partner that we can talk about these things, even if there is something that is perhaps initially uncomfortable, right? We want to be able to talk about, well, what is it about your partner that I might object to? And we can have a rather open and civil dialogue about that in a way that is uh, nonviolent, in a way that invites synchronized communication, right? Communication attunement. So we listen to each other and we try to really appreciate what the other person is trying to say to us and what might be of their concerns, and then we can talk about that. But again, it always comes back to the number one foundation thing, and that is communication, being able to talk openly and honestly.
Okay. And I'm going to group the next three together because I think we can talk about similar things with them. So
Mhm.
they are: don't use polyamory to save a dying relationship. Don't use polyamory as an excuse to do whatever you want. And don't force a relationship open if not all parties are 100% on board. And maybe the first and the last of those are probably the more related. And I think, you hear this often, and I heard it recently from one of my first boyfriends, is somebody had suggested him and his partner or wife are going through a separation, and someone's like, well, why don't you just open your relationship? That might solve everything. And he was like, what? And it's like, oh, it's not working out. So, but if we introduce other people, that's going to make it great.
Yeah, it sounds like it could be potentially like putting Miracle Grow on the problems, right? Because you're going to have whatever issues you already have, plus all these other considerations, plus multiply that by how many different people you might be bringing into this mix, right? All those different variables. But if you already have some core issues that need to be looked at in your existing relationship, polyamory is not going to fix it. It's not going to suddenly eradicate all those issues. What you really need to do is have open dialogues and figure out what's at play, what's causing these issues. And then when those things are resolved, then we invite you to explore this. But it's not a fixer.
Hmm. And then the forcing things open if not all parties are 100% on board
Hmm.
is an interesting one as well. Like some people will agree to it because they're out of fear that the relationship will end. Um, and that's not a great way to start. There are people who do out of preference relationships where one person's polyamorous, and one person's monogamous by
Hmm.
choice. I think that's a little bit different. I think those can be a little trickier to navigate. But that's a possibility, but only if you have a really good, I think you'd have to put a really good agreement in place and really make sure everybody's comfortable with that, and not that the person that's staying monogamous is just doing it to save the relationship or
Hmm.
do things. Yeah.
What's interesting to me as we explore this, it reminds me that, and I don't know why it's shifted, but in the very beginning, when we would meet couples, often the female presenting partners would want to kind of have like a little side chat to check, well, are you being coerced into this in any way? Or are you really coming at this with openness and desire of your own? It's
Hmm.
interesting. And yet it doesn't seem to be quite as much. I wonder how we account for that shift, but it is quite interesting. But yes, we should never do this out of any kind of duress or feeling as though, well, if I don't do this, then my partner is going to leave me. It's just not going to be the good basis for opening this up.
Yeah, and then the other one we sort of missed, which is using a polyamorous excuse to do whatever you want. It's like,
Hmm.
oh yeah, because we're polyamorous, I can go and like whatever. I don't have to talk to my partner. I can just go and have sex with whomever I want. Whatever. It just means I can do everything, and I think definitely a myth. That's not.
Yeah.
This is something that's not true.
And that kind of goes into one of the next ones that says, don't use polyamory as an excuse to cheat. Well,
Hmm.
we say that we are E&M, ethically non-monogamous, right? Or that we do open relating, which means that there is a dialogue about this, that the other person or persons know what's going on. We do not advocate for cheating whatsoever. This is all by agreement. This is the openness to it. It's what makes it ethical,
Yeah. And you can cheat in non-monogamy. You can,
for
like
sure.
by being secretive, and
Hmm.
you can also cheat by being, with someone who's not open as well. You can still be cheating that way too.
Hmm.
So I think we talked about this. Oh, oh, this is a good one. Don't assume polyamory makes you better than monogamous people. Don't get all righteous on those monogamous people.
Just because we are. No, no, for sure. Monogamy is beautiful, right? If it works for you, then more power to you. But don't yuck my yum. Just
Yes,
because polyamory might not be for you, please allow me to relate the way that I prefer to relate, just as I would want you to relate the way you want to relate. Yeah. We seem to have glossed over one. We skipped one, and that is
oh,
don't use other human beings as a fetish, experiment, or trial. I actually know some people who want to be fetishized. I might want to be on occasion. So I'm not sure if I agree with that completely. However, that being said, it's okay to use somebody as a fetish if they are knowing
consent.
that, if they are complying to that,
Consenting.
right? Yeah, that's
Yeah,
a big difference.
absolutely. Okay. Don't jump into polyamory if you don't know yourself. Figure out your own shit so that you don't drag others into it. And I think we talked a bit about this, and I
Mm.
think that's 100% true.
But
Make sure you're good.
maybe we won't always know or could never really know everything about ourselves, but we will find out a lot about ourselves in polyamory, especially if we are going through any growth periods, we'll say.
Yeah. And then I think the last ones are related to some of the do ones. So don't
Mm.
assume that love is finite. So we talked about that a bit on the do side, like do believe in abundance. Don't be afraid of change. So be open to change. And then don't judge yourself for experiencing a learning curve. That's a good one, I think.
Mhm. Yeah, and I think it's wonderful, right? Because that is speaking to the idea of our being curious about ourselves, about being gentle with ourselves, and that uh, we will make mistakes in life. Hopefully, we're making mistakes all the time because that is growth, that is the learning process, but that we might do so with an open heart. So when we do make a mistake, we then say, well, okay, this went sideways. I recognize this. And let's go from there. So it is a much softer and more inviting way of being with ourselves and with others than saying, oh, I'm just the worst person because I did this mistake and it's happening again, blah, blah, blah. That doesn't add for exploration. It doesn't add for growth. It really just becomes very limiting. So be gentle with ourselves and be gentle with others.
Yeah, absolutely. And
Yeah.
so that's the list. And so maybe we've got a couple more minutes. We can throw in some other do's and don'ts. I
Mhm.
mean, for me, the one big do that was missing, I mean, we kind of talked about it throughout these, but I think the big do is learning how to communicate effectively, would be like my
Mhm.
number one do. And that includes active listening. So,
Oh, yeah.
listening to understand and learning and practicing methods such as nonviolent communication. And then we teach our own method, which is called attunement communication, which is a little more detailed, but like really learning and practicing effective communication.
Mhm. Yeah, don't yuck my yum, I think is another one
Yep.
that's there. And also perhaps do be willing to look at things like your love language and your attachment style, right? How do you want to be treated? How do others want to be? How do we relate to others? What what comes up when I do think about being with people, and what is going on there? So all of that will help inform us into what it is we're wanting and not wanting, and what is the other person wanting and not wanting.
Exactly. One of the
Yeah.
other big do's, and it's something we cover in both our program and our digital course, is setting agreements with people that you're in relationships with that everyone involved can agree to,
Yeah.
consent to. Yeah. So not imposing rules or agreements on others. I mean, it's hard if you already have an agreement with an existing partner and you meet someone new, but you can share that and make sure that person is cool with it.
Mm.
And so that they're aware what's in place and that they can consent to that.
Yeah.
Anything else?
I'd like to hear from our listeners if they have anything else that they're wanting to put on. Yeah. It's a
Absolutely.
it's an ever evolving list.
Amazing. Yeah.
Mm.
Well, that was fun. I like doing that, do's and don'ts of polyamory.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun.
That covered a lot of subjects at a very high level, but it was a good look at some of the main things that people come up with.
Mhm.
So, yeah,
Fantastic.
awesome. Thanks, Andre, for being an amazing co host with me for the Let's Talk Polyamory podcast, where we talk today about the do's and don'ts of polyamory. So, make sure you check out our other episodes, which are up on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and now YouTube podcasts.
Yeah.
All right. All right.
Well, thank
Thanks,
you,
everyone.
Tara.
Huh?
Thank you, Tara.
Oh, thank you, Andre.
All right.
Have a
Thank you,
great
everyone.
rest of your day, people.
Yeah. Namaste. Yeah.